All right. So at this point, we're really wanting to kind of build the inside of the car. Now, I am going to keep the inside of the car simpler, right? Because this is meant to be a good car that we're building here, but it's not meant to be like every little detail, right? We only have a certain amount of time, a certain term. It's really about showing you guys how to build a more complicated hard surface thing with these tools, right, that we have here. So we're going to focus on making the inside of the car kind of more the general basic forms, right? Kind of like a main kind of floor shell, some simple quick seats, something that we can have visually be there inside some tinted windows, right? So, this is not trying to be the most comprehensive car with every little part that you ever build on it, but it's meant to kind of display how fast, how easy this extrude and bridge border edge loop technique is, and that it can be quite good at making things like this, right? So, all right, so let's continue that, right? So really we want to focus on kind of the inner body here, right? And in this case, we can always, of course, turn the eyeballs off for all of our other parts if we really wanted to focus just on these. I feel like I do want some of these parts on, though, so I am going to kind of keep... I feel like the roof and maybe the door and the hood, right? Just because we do need some of this available, but we can, turn the visibility off for some of these things to declutter a little bit so we can kind of focus a little more on it. Now, the great thing is that I'm really not going to be doing anything new here. This is techniques we already know, right? It's techniques we already know. It's just going to be the extrude and bridge border edge loops and things like that. So in this case, what we want to do, of course, is select the car body, right? And we'll hit 2 for edge mode. And let's get in here and let's actually do some modeling on that. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. And I'm going to start to kind of grab these edges right here. So I'm just going to kind of grab those edges. Remember, Shift will add your selections. Remember, F is frame selection, just like it is in Maya. In fact, if you've got your tweak tool on, right, Shift will deselect. You'll notice that if it is basically any of your kind of single click selection tools, Shift will do your deselecting. Control can be used to kind of deselect an edge loop, but believe it or not, you'll actually often use your Shift to select and deselect. Sometimes Control, though, can be used for that. So don't think you can't use Control, but you might be in that position where Shift will work easier for you, particularly when you're doing stuff like tweak or box select. Any single-click selection feature, Shift tends to work for deselecting as well as adding selecting, right, for selecting and deselecting. Control can do deselect edge loops. It can also, I believe, works with your drag select as well. So just keep that stuff in mind. But what we want to do is we just want to select some edges, right? And we want to hit Control-E because that's our extrude, right? And then we're going to do middle mouse button because that's going to give us our view extrude. Bring that out a little bit, right? And then, of course, we can middle mouse a click again to do another one. If we want to, we can hit W for move, of course, and middle mouse button to view move. And then Control-E for extrude again. Remember, if you want to flatten the shape down a little bit, of course, there is this flatten tool, but you'll notice that it's good, but it's not always exactly what you need it to be. So sometimes I just turn my scale tool on and just kind of flatten it down. Because even though you have options in here and you can play with best fit versus normal versus view, I sometimes tend to find that it's easier just to do a 0 scale to straighten something up than to try to flatten it all the time. Double left click. Remember, double left click selects your edge loops. And your edge loops will work here as well. So you see how it won't select the whole edge loop? It just stops at kind of that vertex with only 2 edges. And of course, we can hit Control-E to bring this down as well. And you see I'm kind of trying to make sure that there's like a row of polygons here to this one, a row of polygons here to this one. So I'll do an extrude here, and then kind of one more, just to kind of get us that overall basic stuff. And of course, I could line these up better. Double left click, middle mouse button, double left click. And you see how your move tool could still be on, right? So remember, W is your quick key for the move tool, particularly if you're using industry compatible. And then middle mouse button is just your view move. You can view move these. Grab on the handles if you want to, or even the constraint squares, right, if you just want to move along 2 axes. And then, of course, what we want to do is bridge, right? So I could easily select this edge, and then shift left-click this edge, Now you'll notice there's 2 edges not selected in between. Remember, that is your select linked shortest path, right? Now I have a quick key set up for this. It doesn't default have a quick key. If you want to set up your own quick key, remember, it's just right click on the tool. And in this case, since I have one, it gives you the option to change shortcut, which you can. But if you don't, it'll have an assign shortcut. That's how easy it is to add edge loops. So I'm just going to use the quick key for that. But you notice it selects in between, right? It's kind of basically like Maya's range selection tool. Except technically, if you're kind of doing different edges on the parts of the model, it'll actually try to find the actual shortest path of edges. But usually it'll work great as a range feature. So shift left click there, and then of course select linked shortest path. And then of course right click. Remember, right click will bring up your context menu for edges. Really brings up your context menu for everything, right? Vertices, edges, faces, objects. I have a quick key set up for bridge because I use bridge a lot, so it's worth having a quick key for. But it doesn't have a default one. So Shift B is what I assign to it, but you always right click and it's there. And remember, that just creates geometry in between the selections. So it is quite accurately named as bridge. And then, of course, we could double left click to select this edge loop here. Right click, new face from edges, and that makes our new polygon there. Now, that does leave an n-gon. Although, in this case, you notice how the n-gon's not acting as too bad a shape. So, really, you want to work mostly as quads in most of the things you build, right? Cars, characters, creatures, anything that's got a lot of curvature, anything that's going to deform and change the shape like characters, creatures, you're never going to go wrong by working primarily with quads. But this part doesn't animate. It's in an area that you don't see that much. You notice how the n-gon's not creating too weird a shape. We've seen that if you're working on, like, say, a wall for building and you've got a lot of booleans, you can usually get away with n-gons or triangulate that area because it's flat, it doesn't animate, it's all coplanar polygons. So as much as we want to, and you should work with quads most of the time for most of your models, occasionally it's okay to have a triangle or an n-gon if it does not cause problems. The problems it can cause is animation. It can animate very unpredictably, right? So particularly for characters, creatures, pretty much all quads. But hard surface stuff, you can get away a little bit more with the occasional triangle or n-gon if it doesn't do a weird shape. If it does a weird shape, that's when you have to worry about it. So if I was to like slowly select these edges right here and hit delete, right? Now you notice I've assigned some quick keys here like control delete for dissolve edges. Now you notice how that n-gon is doing some really weird shaping. See how that shape is just ugly? So if that's your n-gon, and particularly you want the shape to be rounded and you're in subdivisional modifier, and you see it and you're looking at it going, oh, that's ugly. That's why you don't use an n-gon, right? But you notice that there's a difference between this giant n-gon making a really ugly, weird shape and that one, which doesn't appear to be doing much harm at all. In this case, though, I'm going to go to vertex, right? One for vertices. Select these 2 vertices. Because it's generally always better to have a triangle than an n-gon. Triangles are actually quite predictable. They're just not easy to model with, right? If you have a model all triangulated, it's really difficult to model with. You can't select edge loops. You can't add edge loops with loop cut. So I'm going to right-click. Because remember, right-click brings up your context menu. In this case, vertex. And you'll see that there is a connect vertex pairs. And that will just put an edge in between those vertices. And you see how that shape works pretty well for us. So remember, as much as I want you guys to have a strong bias towards modeling with quads, because it's kind of the Goldilocks polygon, right? The occasional triangle and n-gon, if it's not going to be animated, if it's not doing anything terribly weird with your shape or weird at all, you can kind of get away with it, right? You will see n-gons and triangles the most on buildings, desks, things that you need to use booleans on, which, believe it or not, you don't really have to use booleans that much if you're using this method that I'm showing you to build a car. All right, so that gives us now kind of that front part of the door, just like this section. And I feel like I'm actually going to kind of extend this back part here too. So we'll go to 2 for edge mode. I'll just grab these edges, because this is basically just going to be a 2-seater car. So I'll grab these edges. Control E for extrude, bring them down. Probably bring them back in though. W for move, right? And remember, since clipping is on for your mirror modifier, when you move, and even if you move right, it doesn't pull that center off, right? It keeps those welded together, and it also doesn't move it, which is great. Control E for extrusion again. If I need to, I can always, switch to W for move, double left click. Remember, you can always grab the handles too. If you want to move it exactly on the yellow axis, you could do that, or the blue. Remember, sorry, not yellow, green. I'm not colorblind, I promise. That's the y-axis, of course, Z. You do notice, though, that some of you guys that had Maya with me last term, Maya by default uses Y as the up axis, whereas Blender uses Z, like 3D Studio Max does. And it's the one thing I haven't figured out how you can change that in Blender. So, but the thing is that it doesn't matter which axis is used. Technically, Pixar uses Z as up axis. It is fairly arbitrary, though, right? They're just names for axes. So yeah, it's one of those things that doesn't really matter. Like Moto and Maya by default have Y as the up axis. 3D Studio Max doesn't. Blender doesn't. Doesn't really matter though, because it's just an axis, right? It might matter more to your math physicist who's like, well, in trigonometry, the Z is the up axis. I'm like, all right, whatever, I don't care. It's kind of one of those things where it's like you do realize they're just names for different axes. It's like it doesn't matter actually that much. But Blender does use Z as the up axis. All right, so just kind of trying to get a little more of this here. In this case, we can see that there's a bit of that door there, so I'm probably going to tweak these guys in a little bit. Remember, tweak is right here. Q toggles you through all these, but of course you can assign your own quick keys to them. And I just want to get a little more space here. And you see, once again, I'm trying to make sure there's kind of a row to match here, a row to match here. So I'll do Control E for extrude again, and then one more middle mouse button. Remember, middle mouse button, if you don't left-click drag on the actual yellow handle or the white handle here, see how you can grab these? If you don't grab those, it's basically a middle mouse button, right? You actually even see right here, it kind of tells you at the bottom, right? Right-click calls menu, right? So you can bring up your menu for your context. But middle mouse button, you see how it extrudes region and move, right? So just keep that in mind, right? Maybe R for scale, just to scale it down on the Z a little bit. Move it down. Double left-click, because remember, double left-click selects edge loops. And we can just kind of move these shapes around a little more to match them up there a bit better. And then, of course, I can select an edge there. Shift, just make sure to... Remember, Shift will deselect as well. Right? So if you Shift, it could deselect. And then, of course, select menu, linked, select linked. Remember, that's where your ability to select all connected polygons, right bracket of that, but also shortest path. There we go. And then I'll Shift left click over here, Shift left click over here. And remember, Blender is actually quite good at grabbing the closest edge. So you don't even have to grab exactly on it. If you grab a little bit over from it, it'll select it. And it's better to err kind of on the side where there's a polygon, right? So select link shortest path. I'm going to the menu just to remind you guys where it's at, right? And to have video evidence of where it's at. I have a quick key. So when I'm working, I use tons of quick keys. I know some of these quick keys aren't on by default, so that's why I do a little more menu stuff for you guys. So shortest path. And then, of course, right-click, bridge edge loops, right? Because it's edge context menu, even though I have a quick key for it. Now, in this case, you'll notice I made all triangles. Oh, yep. Okay, my bad. Because I actually have 5 edges here. There's actually one more here that we need. So remember, Alt-C for loop cut. Right? Remember, Alt-C is your quick key for loop cut. It's right there. You just left-click to put it in. There we go. So there was actually one missing. I had 4 to 5. So there we go. There we go. There we go. And then bridge edge loops. And there you go. So you notice if you have different numbers to different numbers, like say 4 to 5 edges, it creates triangles. So double left-click there. Right-click, new face from edges, because that's how you can make a polygon. And that's actually a quad, so it's really just kind of more of a shape thing, right? You can just kind of bring some of these over a little bit if you want to. Bring some of them down a little bit. There we go. And that's really just our back seat. You can always keep adjusting these, right? All right. So slowly but surely, we're just kind of filling in a lot of the rest of the body so that there's something there for... our windows later on, right? So I'm going to switch back over to here just so we can kind of start to get the build up here up front. So I'm going to go to 2 for edge mode again. I'm going to select this edge, and I'm going to Control E. I'm just going to do a small little extrusion on this guy. Actually, I'm going to add this one. Remember, you can undo the extrusion and have the extrude tool still on. And if I shift left click, you see how it adds an edge? So you can actually, kind of like 3D Studio Max, have the tool be on, but not run it, right? And when you get used to that, it's actually pretty neat, right? That way I can undo, but then say, hey, you know, I'm just going to now extrude it. There we go. And I just wanted to kind of get a little bit of this kind of out here for where those meet. But also gives me this polygon that I can then extrude. Control E. Or, sorry, middle mouse button, because I'm already in extrude. Middle mouse button. And of course, if I want to, you can see how it's kind of going down there a little bit. Now remember, if you go to the select menu, there is something called select more less, right? And you'll see there's an up arrow and a down arrow, right? So up and down arrow grow your selection. So I can hit up arrow and you see how it kind of expands that. Up arrow expands that. And then I can move this down a bit. There we go. Down arrow to shrink, right? So I can move this down and then down arrow to shrink again. And you see how the more or less works really, really well in Blender, right? I know I've talked about this before, but we don't always use it. But in this case, it was useful because I just kind of extruded it up and you saw the shape was off. So more or less, up and down arrow, which are great quick keys for that. And then, of course, I can do Control E for one more extrusion. And remember, the clipping will automatically weld those. And then it's just kind of adjusting the shape a little bit. I can switch back to my tweak tool if I wanted to tweak some of these out a little bit there. Remember, I love tweak. It's a great, fast, easy way to make shape changes. If this was like a desk or a building, no, right? You really want to use your actual red, green, and blue, your X, Y, Z axes. But on characters and creatures, cars, where there's lots of curvilinear form, tweak's actually awesome, right? It just gives you the ability just to select quickly and move based on the view. There we go. And now you can see that there's actually kind of a bit of that hood, right? And so even though we didn't build the hood to have that part, you see how easy it was to just add it? This is the beauty of this method, is even when you don't have a plan for your car and you just want to design it in here, it's super easy to build this stuff up, right? Because you're kind of just extruding what you want as a part of the panel and building the rest of it. So remember, I just use select linked shortest path. And then we'll hit Control E for extrusion. And in this case, I'm going to hit R for scale so I can scale this in a bit. And remember, you can go past that 0 to kind of inverse it, right? So if I go past the center of the scale tool, see how it kind of flips it around? And you see how this can start to be our actual kind of front section for where our actual dash is going to be for the car, right? Now at this point, if I wanted to, because there's more to do here and it's already 9:31, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of connect these guys up, and then we'll kind of finish this dash off on Thursday and kind of build the seats. All right. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of grab this edge to this edge, and I think that'll be good because then I can kind of start to connect these together. So just 2 edges, one here. Right-click, bridge edge loops, and that just creates that extra bit of geometry there. And of course, we can see that there are more edges here, so we could always do Alt-C for loop cut. Left-click drag, left-click drag. And remember, and that's Alt-C for loop cut, so it automatically goes in loop cut mode, right? And it's always perpendicular to the edge you're on. And this works really, really well with quads, right? Because there's always a single opposite edge for it to find, predictably. If you have triangles or n-gons a lot, you'll see it stops there because the tool doesn't know where to go in a predictable fashion. So I'm going to add one more here just because there's 4 to 4. And then, of course, we can go 2 for edge mode. And then I can select that edge. Shift left click that edge. Remember, there is the select menu, shortest path, select linked. And then, of course, I could do it here as well. Let's use my quick key this time. And in this case, you see I've got 4 edges to 4 edges. And you notice there's a single edge here that aren't selected because, remember, bridges need separate selections, right? They should be the same number if you want it to be quads, but they also have to be separate selections, right? They can't be continuous. So right click, and of course, bridge edge loops. And you see that auto welds those corners there? And here I can just come in and I can tweak the shape a little bit more if I wanted to, right? So maybe we can keep tweaking those shapes to get them closer to what you actually want. But more than anything, we're just showing how all of this stuff can connect together in really fun, dynamic, flexible ways to make the shapes and forms you want, right? All right. So that'll be a great place to stop for today. So let me stop the recording.